Hey guys, Yips here coming at you with another video, and this is going to be a bit of a continuation video from last time. In this one, we're going to talk about cooldown management, managing your eclipses on pulls, and what you should be doing when you're actually in the pack and fighting. It's a continuation, like I said, from last time, so if you haven't watched the previous video, I highly recommend doing that first, and if you have, that's great. In this one, we'll go over all of the other things that I feel like you need to know to succeed as a boomkin in Mythic Plus. So, the very first thing I want to talk about is your eclipses in Mythic Plus. You have two eclipses, you have solar and you have lunar. The way you want to be thinking about your eclipses in Mythic Plus on trash pulls, solar is the eclipse where it gives you time to generate a lot of extra astral power, and it gives you time to dot. Lunar eclipse is the eclipse where you want to proc and you want to sit there and you want to mash Starfire for mass AoE damage. And you always want to be thinking in the dungeon which eclipse you want to proc first on each pull. Now, sometimes you won't have this choice. Sometimes you will have just proc, say, solar on the last pack and you'll only have lunar available to you. But a lot of the time, when you're coming out of things like celestial alignment, when you're coming off bosses, you'll have both of your eclipses available to you, and you really want to be actively thinking about which one you want to proc on the pulls to come. So, just to give you guys some brief examples of dungeons examples, I'll talk a little bit of this more in a Mythic Plus commentary, but in Mists of Tirana Scythe, when you go into this dungeon, you see the mobs that have the larva spawns on them. These mobs don't live very long. You're probably going to want to proc a lunar eclipse as quickly as possible in order to spam Starfire while all of these mobs are grouped up. However, when you're just going onto a simple 4-pack and they're going to be living, say, 2 eclipse cycles, you want to start in solar, build up a bunch of astral power, get your dots out efficiently, and then proc your lunar and not feel like you have to dot while you're in it, and you can just sit there and mash Starfire and finish the pull off that way. It all depends on how long the pull is going to last for which eclipse you want to be procking first, but it is important and it is something you want to be thinking about when you're trying to maximize your overall damage in a dungeon. And I'll talk to you guys a little bit about how I do it in a Mythic Plus commentary. However, most of the time it plays itself out. There's always going to be one eclipse that you can proc, but if the two are available to you, you should actively be thinking about which one is better for you in each specific scenario. Okay? Alright, awesome. The next thing I want to talk about is cooldown management in dungeons. So, Balanced Druid has 2 cooldowns. It has Celestial Alignment, it has Convoke the Spirits, and a lot of the times in Raid, you see every single boomkin lining up these cooldowns together. They'll be using their CA and they'll be using their Convoke the Spirits together on single target bosses. And this, generally speaking, is the best way to do it on single target fights. Celestial Alignment doesn't really do all that much damage on single target by itself without an additional supporting cooldown like Convoke the Spirits. It is huge value to save them both for single target. However, a lot of the time on AoE packs and dungeons, it's going to be better for you to desync your cooldowns to get more uses out of them throughout the whole key. A lot of the times it will work out where before a boss where you want to have Celestial Alignment up, you'll be able to convoke one pack, CA the next, convoke the pack after, at which point your next convoke will line up with your CA as they are 2 and 3 minute cooldowns respectively. So, for example, a very good thing to do in a dungeon like Halls of Atonement, for instance, is you want to be mapping out how many CA uses you could get total before the first boss. So if I'm looking at a route like this, for example, and I'm thinking for myself in a key, and you want to be doing this in all of your keys too, you want to be thinking about the pulls beforehand and mapping out which prospective pulls you would have for your cooldowns. I would think, okay, this very first pull, I'll probably cooldown it with Lust. So that's my first set of CDs. And how many more do I think I get before the first boss? Well, the first boss gets usually pulled around 10 minutes into the dungeon. So if I do one on pull, I do one around 3 minutes, 4 minutes in, and I do one around 7 minutes in, that's going to be the last one I'm going to be able to use. So I have a little bit of wiggle room for that last one. I can use it between 7 and say 8.5 minutes. So that means I get 3 CAs before the first boss, and I want to figure out how best to use them. If I could use one on the first pull here, and then say the next pull takes a minute, and then you have Pride spawning, that takes another minute, so that's about 2 minutes, so CA wouldn't be up for this pull here, so maybe I could convoke this pull and then CA the one after that, and then after that I would convoke, and then they would be lined up again and can use it there, and that's sort of how you want to be thinking about your cooldowns, and I'll show you in a dungeon that I'm doing in a moment with a little bit of commentary over it, how I map out my cooldowns in Spires of Ascension. So really quick, we'll take a look at the MDT, and then I'll actually go into the dungeon and show you guys a decent portion of a run of it, and you guys can get an idea of how Boomkin works. So we don't have a route here, but that's okay. I can just map it out really quickly. So you enter the dungeon. Most groups will pull this pack together, and then they'll do this. Afterwards, the first pack before the boss, you'll do the boss, this and this, like this, these together, like this, not those together, these together, this, and then boss. So this is a pretty decent route for Spires of the Ascension for most groups, and the way that you do it as Boomkin in this key is you want to have Convoke the Spirits and Incarn for the first pack. You want to have Convoke the Spirits and Incarn for the first boss. You want to have Convoke the Spirits and Incarn for the Forsworn Goliath pack, and you want to have Convoke the Spirits and Incarn for this Goliath pack. You want to have Convoke the Spirits and Incarn for this boss. And in between those Incarns, you have a little bit of wiggle room with your Convoke the Spirits, so you'll see in the key how I do that. So let me get the run up here and I can show you guys how everything's done, and I'll give you guys a little bit of commentary over it as well as we go through. So this is a Spires of Ascension 22 run, doing the exact route I just mapped out. So the first pull, I'm going to be doing the Celestial Alignment Convoke the Spirits pull. I don't really have to think about my eclipses too much, although I do proc my eclipse here because there's no reason not to while we're going in and pulling the mobs, get a little bit of extra damage there. As soon as the mobs are grouped up, I'll press trees so I can convoke and use my Celestial Alignment without ripping any threat. Very, very basic stuff here. Starfall on pull, getting my pre-dots out, proccing my first eclipse as soon as possible, convoking and incarning when all the mobs are grouped up and I feel safe. Afterwards, you just spam the Starfires for mass AoE. So that's pretty standard how you're going to be doing it every single time you want to be cooldowning. Get your Starfall up, get your dots out, convoke the spirits, incarn, spam Starfire. Very simple for Boomkin. As this pack is dying, I'm making sure I'm pooling enough astral power so I can chain my Starfalls. Moving into the next pack, I have my lunar eclipse available to me. This is why I'm getting my dots out early here, so that when I proc this eclipse, I'm going to be able to sit there and spam Starfire without having to stop, and I already have my dots out doing max DPS. So my next eclipse is going to be solar. That's my gen phase. I know I'm going to have extra astral power available to me. And one thing that you can do on AoE, although I don't really recommend it, especially if you're in lunar eclipse, is you can refresh your Starfall to refresh your Moonfires. If you have something like 10 Moonfires out on a pack, and you press Starfall, it'll actually refresh those 10 Moonfires by 5 seconds, and sometimes that can be more worth it than pressing a global on, say, Wrath or something of that nature. So that was the first section of this dungeon done, and it took us around 2 minutes. Each pull in a dungeon, you want to be thinking, should take about a minute if you're at your max level. Each pull Pride takes about a minute. Some trash packs might take a minute, minute 30. Most trash packs take around a minute to do, and that's a good general idea to think about how you want to be mapping your cooldowns. If you convoke a pack and Pride is coming after it, you'll have convoke for after the Pride. Just something to keep in mind as you're going through keys. So here we're about to go to the next pack. I'm saving my next eclipse. It's going to be a lunar eclipse, which means when all the mobs are grouped, I'm going to be wanting to procking that and spamming Starfires. Now, like I just said, that rule of thumb, if you're going into a pack and then you have Pride and then a pack after, generally speaking, that's about a 2-minute sequence, meaning I get to go into this pack, my convoke is off cooldown, I'll be able to use it and then have it back up again for after when that Pride dies, and I can line it up with my Incarn on the boss. So that's why I'll be using Convoke the Spirits here, even though a lot of the time you want to be saving it for that Incarn talent. It is better to just get uses than to not. Pre-Starfalling, proccing my Eclipse as soon as possible, sitting here and spamming Starfires on the mobs, making sure I'm keeping up my Starfall, pressing Convoke on cooldown. Something that I see a lot of Druids do, and something that you can fall into a trap is, a lot of the times in dungeons, you'll want to get the perfect convoke off, or you'll want to get the perfect celestial alignment off. And while a lot of the times that is going to be a DPS increase in the moment, it's going to severely delay your cooldown usage overall. Now, what I mean by that is when you're in a dungeon and say you delay your cooldowns by 20-30 seconds in order to proc that next eclipse, get your boat for that convoke, in order to get all of your moonfires and all of your sunfires out and your starfall out. If you're doing that and you're delaying those cooldowns an extra 20-30 seconds in order to optimize it, that's 20 or 30 seconds where it won't be back up later when you might need it to meet a certain timing. So that's something that you need to work out for yourselves to figure out which pulls it is optimal to do that sort of a sequencing with and which ones it's not. So you saw there I procced my Eclipse and I didn't have my boat, but I still sent my Convoke because I want it to be back up early on the boss fight. Really, really important things to be thinking about when you're in a dungeon. Sometimes it's better just to send the cooldown so you know you'll have it back up later, even if it's not going to be the most optimal single target usage out of it. Dungeons are a fluid thing. They're not static like raids. Sometimes things change on the fly, and it's important to be able to react to those sort of things. So we just finished up the Pride there. Very easy stuff. You can see my Convoke is going to be back in 30 seconds, meaning I'll be able to line it up with my Incarn, with Lust, and with Pride. A lot of druids can be hesitant to do things like this, but when you're in a dungeon, it's okay if your cooldowns aren't up on pull on the boss, as long as they're up within a reasonable segment. You can cool down a minute into the boss, a minute 30 into the boss, as long as you have them up and they're available for an important moment. It's not actually going to hurt your damage too much to pop them later. So you'll see here, as soon as they come back up, I'm going to be sending them right away with that Pride buff, with that Lust buff, and do a bunch of damage. And it doesn't really hurt my overall very much. I got an extra Convoke on the pack beforehand, but that's why I sent it early on that pack. I didn't delay it, because if I delayed it, I wouldn't have had it for Lust, and I wouldn't have had it with Pride if I had waited for my next Solar Eclipse. Just little things like that do make a difference overall when you're running in a Keystone. So just standard stuff here, keeping Starfall up on 2 targets, making sure my dots are maintained, not wasting any extra astral power. Super simple stuff on single target, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the pack after. Alright, awesome. So boss is dying here. Let's skip ahead a little bit. Don't need to watch me do 2-target cleave. Alright, sweet. So the boss died, and like I said, you see my CA is coming off cooldown in 30 seconds. I can't use it because the way that the dungeon is mapped out, unfortunately for us, I need to have it up for a very specific moment. And since this pack will take about a minute to complete, the next one will take about a minute, and Pride will take about a minute. Since it's up in 30 seconds, that means there's going to be a 30-second window downtime where I wouldn't have the cooldown available when I need it on pull. But that being said, I do just get to send my Convoke here because it's not a 3-minute cooldown, it's just a 2-minute cooldown. So maybe a more inexperienced Boomkin might have pressed CA and Convoke here when they both came back up. However, since I know I need it later in the dungeon, I'm going to be saving it and just using my Convoke the Spirits here. And that's just something that you get used to doing, especially if you're running with a set group and you know which pulls are scary and you know which ones you need your cooldowns for. You'll know how to properly utilize them. This is why I highly recommend every single time you join a pug, every single time I join a pug, I make sure I get the tank to link his MDT and which mobs he's going to be pulling, so I know the flow of the dungeon and I know what's going to be happening next. So this pull, I have 1 charge of my Wrath. This means I'm going to be proccing my Lunar Eclipse as soon as I can on pull. I have a proper amount of AP going into the next pack. I proc it, I get in a good position. I'm moving to the mobs. As soon as the mobs are grouped up in stack, I'm going to start spamming that Starfire. So really just basic standard stuff here, getting into a really good position, using my utility for the tank, spamming my Starfire, proccing my next Eclipse as soon as possible, moving on to the next pack. Definitely here, I probably could have spent more time just sitting there single targeting with Starfires, but I wanted to get into a really good position and make sure the mobs were grouped up and optimized and the tank wasn't dying. Thinking about some other things while I was on this pull, but to optimize my damage further, I could have just been sitting back, spamming Starfire, and then when I procced my Solar Eclipse, started dotting. That definitely is one way to do it. Here, I proc my Lunar Eclipse again, so I get 2 Lunar Eclipses on this pull, which is pretty strong. The mobs aren't really that grouped for the Starfire cleave, but still decent damage done on this pack for not having any cooldowns. After this, I know it's Pride, and then I know it's going to be the Goliath pull, so saving my Celestial Alignment, saving my Convoke the Spirits for those pulls. I have Heart of the Wild up to help heal this Pride if we are struggling. And that's something that you should really be doing as a Boomkin. If you know the next pull you want to be using cooldowns on, that means the Pride won't have any cooldowns to be using for it, which means it's going to take a long time and your healer is going to be in trouble. As a Boomkin, if you're running Restoration Affinity and you have Heart of the Wild, you can actually do a ridiculous amount of healing in a short period of time with your mana bar. Your Swiftmans hit for above 20,000, your regrowths are hitting for 12, 15k on each person. You can just constantly snap your teammates' health back up to full while they finish the Pride off for you when it gets low on HP. Really, really useful stuff, and really, really good to do. So, thinking about the next pack, going to be pooling my AP, pooling my next Eclipse for it, all of the good stuff that you should be doing as a Druid. So just healing my group here. And then I think when the pride gets a little bit lower, I might switch out to start proccing some AP. At least I should be, but I think I'm more concerned about my group dying here. Ideally, I didn't send all my star surges when the pride was about to die. However, I did, so that means my AP is going to be low for the next pack, which isn't optimal for my DPS. Something you should definitely do is save enough AP for a starfall here. So what I do to kind of make up for that is I precast this Wrath, I try to proc my Eclipse, and I try to generate Astral Power. It would be really good if I could use Starfall here before I use my Convoke and use my Celestial Alignment. I didn't think that I had enough AP when I was going into this pack, but it turned out that I was getting a lot of Shooting Stars procs, and my AP did go up above 50, so it would have definitely been worth it for me to press Starfall before I Convoked and before I CA'd on this pack. I got really lucky. I got a Starfall really early on during my CA, meaning I got to do a lot of damage. However, if I didn't get that proc, my DPS would have been a lot less, and that would have been a big mistake. So just playing this pack pretty standard, pressing my cooldowns as soon as they're available so they're up when I need them next. It's going to be this pack and then 2 packs plus Pride. That's about a 3-minute segment, so getting my cooldowns off early here, doing as much damage as possible to the pack, and then we're going to be moving on quickly to the next one. So thinking about my relevant procs, I want to have a Lunar Eclipse available for the next pack because it's going to be heavy AoE on pull, so I proc my Solar Eclipse here out of my CA and able to do a lot of damage with that, get Nature Lock because I'm a noob, but either way, that's the general idea, and those are the things that you want to be thinking about when you're on the packs. So just finishing up here, making sure I save my next, oh, I don't, I'm a big noob. I should have saved my Eclipse there. I really should have. I have my Eclipse going into this pack because we're pulling it now, but I really should have saved that Wrath for when the pack got pulled and not used it there. Maybe the tank said something about chaining, however, it would have been better for me to save my Eclipse there. And in every dungeon, I definitely don't play perfectly, but I think it's important to point out mistakes when they do happen. And often I do rewatch my runs, and I note things that I do incorrectly on packs, so the next time I play, I can improve and do better in that sense. So this pack is pretty standard. Get all my dots out when I'm in my solar, keep my Starfall up, proc my next Eclipse, spam the Starfires, all the good stuff. Most boomkins don't mess this part up, so pretty easy things going on here. And then we'll be moving on to the next segment. So the next segment is 1 pack, Pride, cooldowns. Pretty basic stuff, so what I want to be thinking about here is saving my Eclipse for the next pack, which I do. I save a Solar Eclipse for the next pack. That means my goals during my Solar Eclipse is proc it, get my dots out, and then once I proc my Lunar Eclipse, I want to be able to sit there and spam Starfire. That's my plan in my head. That's what I'm thinking when I'm going into this pack. Pop my Starfall, get my dots out, proc my Eclipse, then I can blast when I get into that Lunar one. Making sure I have enough AP for my next Starfall. I do that. See me dotting here. My Eclipse is starting to run out. Cancel my cast so I don't get locked out. Mobs are dying really quickly, but proc my Lunar and then spam. And that's the optimal setup. And if this pack lived, say, another 10-15 seconds, you would see my DPS go up even higher because I prepped that properly. I'm in my Lunar. I'm spamming Lunar strikes on AoE. It's a lot of DPS. So I have 100 AP starting this Manifestation of Pride, which is really good. I'll proc my Eclipse right away and get 3 quick Star Surges in. That's a really good way to start every single Pride, getting that huge burst of damage in. It really does help overall when you're in a run. So just finishing up this Pride. We'll skip ahead a little bit to the next pack. So on this Pride, you definitely want to build up some Astral Power before you go into the next pack. Like I said, you always want to be above 50, so that's what I make sure that I do. Make sure I'm at 59 going into this next pack. I have my cooldowns up, so you'll see what I do is Starfall, get some dots out, and then insta-convoke. These mobs die very quickly to a Fire Mage in Pride with all your cooldowns up, and if you want any semblance or any hope of doing damage, all you have to do, Sunfire, Starfall, Convoke, you're doing big damage with just your Starfall. And the Convoke instant cast, obviously. But most of those are just single target things. Convoke doesn't really do that much AoE damage on its own. It's shooting at a bunch of Star Surges, which are doing a lot of damage, but it's mainly the fact that you're double eclipsed with both Starfall and dots, ticking very, very hard. So that pack dies very, very quickly. Very nice stuff. And then we just move on to the next one. So hopefully with this sort of a segment and me talking about it, you get guys an idea of how to play your eclipses when you're in a dungeon, maybe a better idea of how to play overall, how to manage your cooldowns throughout a key. If you know you don't have to save your Convoke the Spirits or your Celestial Alignment, almost using them on cooldown You want to be thinking about each pack in the sense of what's going to be happening next, what I want to do at the next portion of the dungeon, not so much what's optimal in the moment. Being in the moment at Boomkin is very easy on AoE. If you have your dots out and you're cycling eclipses with Starfall, it's a very, very basic spec to play. It's always thinking about what's next. What do I want to be in for the next portion of the key? How do I want to position so I can get to the pack as soon as the tank pulls it? Where do I want to be standing when the mobs die? All of this stuff is a really big damage gain, and I can't stress it enough. Precasting before every pack, getting extra astral power, getting your dots out faster, being quick in a keystone is what's going to lead you to do a lot better. And it was the same thing for Warlock back in Legion, and even in this expansion if you were playing Warlock and Keys. It's the exact same thing. You want to be quick about getting to the next pack, quick about precasting your Seed of Corruption, quick about precasting everything that you're doing, and it's going to allow you to do a lot more damage overall. So hopefully this video was insightful for everybody and hopefully it helped you guys out a lot. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you guys next time.